Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Susan Kemp. I'm the manager of the International Student Support Office at OCAD, and I'd like to introduce you to our guest speakers for today. We're very lucky to have two immigration law experts with us, Elizabeth Long and Zia Sumar from Long Mungalji LLP, an immigration law firm in Toronto. And today, Elizabeth and Zia are going to talk to you about the rules for working as a student, how to apply for your post-graduation work permit, and also the different options available if you're interested in permanent residence. So Elizabeth and Zia, I'll turn things over to you.
Thank you so much, Susan. It's great to be here, guys. We've been coming to OCAD for several years, every year to talk with students. And every year we come, there's something new. And for sure, today we're going to talk about a lot of changes that are going to happen. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about both permanent residence and temporary residence, okay? Before we talk about permanent residence, it's very important that you guys understand what you need to do while you have your study permit, how to get your work permit, so that you can be well prepared to apply for permanent residence when you can.
So let's start by talking about one very important concept, your status here in Canada. You want to make sure that while you're here in Canada, you always have valid status, okay? When you're nearing the end, so when you're nearing the expiry date on your study permit, you do want to make sure that you're submitting your extension applications prior to that expiry date so that you have what's called implied or maintained status. This allows you to continue studying or working while you're waiting for a decision on that extension application, okay? So you want to make sure that that extension application is properly submitted prior to the expiry date that's listed on your permit. As long as you submit that extension application properly, you'll hold what's called implied status. Now, really important though, that application does have to be submitted properly. It has to be a complete application. So for example, if you forget to pay the application fees, that's considered an incomplete application and your extension application would be returned. So it's as if you had never filed that extension application. Now, in this case, or if you've by accident missed that expiry date, you wake up one morning and you realize that your permit expired the night before, there is what's called restoration. So this is for individuals who have now lost their status and they're applying to get their status back. For restoration, there's a specific period of time in which you have to file your restoration application. You have 90 days from when you lose your status to file your restoration application. So if you missed your expiry date on your study permit, for example, and now you need to apply for restoration, you have 90 days from that expiry date to file your restoration application. Same in the case of if you filed an incomplete application. So if you didn't submit the application fees, the application was returned, that 90-day window still starts from the initial expiry date on your study permit or your work permit. Now, if your application is refused, so let's say you submit an extension application, but that extension application for whatever reason gets refused, you have 90 days from that refusal date to file your restoration application, okay? Now, a couple of questions that we always do get. IRCC's website says that you have to file your extension applications at least 30 days before the expiry date that's listed on your study permit or on your work permit. That's incorrect, okay? By law, you have to file your extension applications prior to the expiry, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the full 30 days before the expiry date. It's just a suggestion that IRCC has, but that's not the law.
You know, the reason why we present this as the first thing in our presentation is because it is super, super important that you guys keep your status in Canada. oftentimes, you have other things to do in your life and you forget. And this, so make sure that that's marked on your calendar like 3 times with 3 reminders, right? But also, sometimes people feel like, well, I don't have all the documents for my application, then I can't submit it. Okay. When Zia talks about applying properly, Zia, what would you say an application needs to be in order, what are the essential elements that an application has to have in order for the application to have been filed properly so that it's not returned?
Yeah, so the minimum documents that are listed on IRCC's document checklist. So for example, your passport, your application form, the fees, a digital photo, these are part of the minimum documents that are definitely required for any extension application.
But even if you didn't have all of the documents on the document checklist, if you file at least the proper forms and you sign it where you're supposed to sign it, I mean, there are certain forms that you can't even sign anyway, right? But it's all filled out, it's validated, okay, when you submit it, and you pay the fees, okay, and it's submitted. You see that button and it says submitted. Make sure, the government, the website is oftentimes, very, very quirky. So sometimes it's not submitted, okay? So make sure when you see it, it says that it was submitted, okay, online. As long as you have that, if you're going to file by paper, most of the time you're going to be filing online. Occasionally, you can file by paper. If you're filing by paper, you have the courier slip, okay, to show that you properly submitted the application and it was received, okay? So 3 things: the fees, the forms, and the proof that you submitted the application. If all 3 are there, then normally the application is not going to be returned. So even if you didn't have everything in time, you would still have implied status. And you can always update your application as well. So if you, for example, your passport has expired or it is going to be expiring and you need to get your new passport, but your study permit is going to be expiring tomorrow, you don't have time to get your new passport, send the application in. You can always update your application through the web form with your new passport. Because what happens is very, very tragic. What happens is sometimes students don't know this. They think, oh, if I don't have everything on the document checklist, I can't submit the application, and you miss your time. So if you miss your time before your study permit expires to extend it, for example, you can't study until you apply for restoration of status and until your restoration of status is approved. That can take several months. So you probably will miss a whole semester, okay? Similarly, the 90 days restoration status is very, very important. It's not 91 days, it's not 92 days. It doesn't matter if you're sick or even if you're in the hospital, okay? It has to be within 90 days of when you lost your status. If you had implied status, it's when you got a refusal on your application. If you didn't have an implied status, is when your study permit had expired, okay? So 90 days from those days. All right. Okay, so the second concept that is super important for you guys to understand is the difference between high-skilled versus low-skilled. When we talk about permanent residence, you're going to see that there is a world of difference between people who have high-skilled work experience and their ability to get permanent residence and those who have low-skilled work experience. So currently, the Canadian government classifies the occupations in what's called a National Occupation Classification Code. And the old codes, which are currently being used, is the O, A, B, C, and D codes. So O, A, and B, the occupations that are falling under those categories are high-skilled, C and D are low-skilled, okay? Now, what's going to happen apparently soon this year is IRCC is going to implement a brand new system called the tier system. Okay, that's not spelled wrong. That's how they're spelling it, TEER. There's going to be, instead of 5 categories, there's going to be 6. 4 of them will qualify as high-skilled, and 2 of them will not be qualified as low-skilled. So as a result, some of the things in the well, this is what the IRCC has been telling us that they are considering, is some of them may be classified as low-skilled. And I think a lot of this, for example, dressmakers, tailors, performers, that may have an effect on, things that you want to do. They may no longer be classified as high-skilled under the new system. There will be 16 new class occupations that will be raised to the high-skilled, including some of the more labor-intensive jobs. Okay.
Okay, let's talk about that study permit. So while you're here studying in Canada, that study permit that you hold has some very obvious conditions, right? So like we talked about the expiry date that's listed on the study permit, right? It tells you when your status ends. But there's also other conditions on the study permit that are not as obvious. They're implied on you. So for example, on the study permit, you must be actively pursuing your studies, okay? What that means is that you always have to be making progress towards the completion of your program, okay? So while you're on a study permit here in Canada, you have to be studying. IRCC wants to see that you're using that time here to be completing a program of study.
Sorry, am I sharing the right screen? Are you guys seeing the right screen?
Yeah, now we are.
You guys seeing the right screen? I'm so sorry about that. Okay.
Yes. So yeah, so you have to be actively pursuing your studies. Now, if you stop studying for whatever reason, whether that's you finish your program early or you decide you don't want to study any longer, once you've stopped studying, that status on your study permit, it does become invalid. Okay, so your study permit becomes invalid 90 days following when you stop studying. Okay, so let's say, for example, you have a study permit that's valid until 2024 and you finish your program early in 2022, so this year. Okay, that study permit doesn't mean that you'll have status in Canada as a student until 2024. It means that 90 days following the end of your program, you lose, that study permit becomes invalid. Okay, so you need to either be changing your status or be thinking about what you're doing next. Now, there are 2 exceptions to that rule. So if you are on a scheduled break, and when we say a regularly scheduled break, what we're referring to is a break in the academic calendar for your program and your school. Okay, so we're not talking about it just being summer and you deciding that you want to take a semester off. It has to be a break, a semester off that's part of your school's calendar for the program that you're studying in. The second exception is if you're on an authorized leave. So this is where you have spoken with your school and received authorization to take a break from your studies. It can be for a variety of different reasons, but it is important to have that authorization from your school and that it is actually written, okay? Because this, and we will talk about it in a couple minutes, but it does affect your next application. So whether you're applying for a postgrad work permit, when you're trying to get that unicorn of a work permit, it is important that you are able to show that you were on a leave. Now, since COVID, we've had the question come up of whether you can study outside of Canada because all our classes are online or have been online for a period of time. Well, right now, if any classes that are online and that you've done outside, while you're physically outside of Canada, up until this summer, so summer 2022, will not affect your eligibility for the postgrad work permit, okay? So pre-COVID, anything that was done online and outside of Canada did affect the eligibility and the length of the postgrad work permit, but right now during the pandemic, IRCC has made a temporary policy, has brought a temporary policy in place that any classes that you're doing that are online and while you're physically outside of Canada will not affect your eligibility for the postgrad work permit. Now, with that being said, there is no policy right now. Basically, when we're talking about applying for permanent residence, classes that you've done online can actually affect your points in express entry, but we'll talk about that in greater detail once we get to the permanent residence options. Now, for those of you who are here in Canada right now and studying on the study permit, one of the benefits that the study permit does afford is the ability to work. Now, it does allow you to work on and off campus as long as you are a full-time student. Okay, so while you are a full-time student, you are able to use that study permit for the purposes of working as well. The exception to the rule of needing to be a full-time student is when you're in your last semester. So if in your last semester you only need a part-time course load in order to finish your program, then you can be a part-time student and still retain the ability to work. When we talk about working using your study permit, there are certain limitations. So for off-campus work, you can work up to 20 hours a week during the school year and full-time during any regularly scheduled break. Okay, so during the school year, a maximum of 20 hours per week. We're not talking about an average. We're not saying that, okay, you know, if you work less hours one week, can you make up and do more hours in the next week? IRCC looks at it on an individual week by week basis. So it's a maximum of 20 hours a week. And then during any scheduled break, so for example, if your program has a summer break, you are able to work full-time. And so there is no maximum for that, for those full-time periods. Once you have, so this ability to work off campus or to work using your study permit, it does end once you have completed your program. Okay, so once you are no longer a full-time student, you do have to stop working using that study permit. Okay, again, this can be whether you have finished your program early, at any point in time, once you have received any confirmation that you have finished your program of study, you do need to stop working using the study permit. Now, if you are going to be starting another program, so let's say going back to our example for an individual who has a study permit valid for another 2 years, okay? And instead of stopping study, you finish one program, you're starting a second program. And as long as the time in between those programs is less than 150 days, you are able to work full-time while you're waiting for your second program to start.
All right, so Zia, let's go through a timeline because this is super important for everyone to understand. Okay, so let's say I'm a student. I am just working on my last, like I finished my exams. I'm, just waiting for my grades to come. Can I work then?
Yes, because you're still considered a student at that point.
Okay, and how many hours can I work?
20 hours a week because you're still within your semester.
Right, and that's off campus, right? Not on campus.
That's correct. So when we talk about these hours, we're talking specifically about off-campus work. You can work both on campus and off campus, and there is no maximum in terms of the number of hours that you can work on campus. So you could be working 40 hours on campus and up to 20 hours off campus.
Okay, great. Okay, so I've done my exams. Now the grades have come. I don't have official transcripts yet, but I see my grades online and I passed and I have, confirmation that I've completed everything.
Yeah, so when we refer to the point in time when you have finished your program, that's any written indication to you that you have met your program requirements and you are now no longer a student. So that can be your final grades being released. It can be a letter from school. It's anything that indicates to you that you've completed your program of study. So going back to your example, the final grades being released would mean that you are now no longer a student, and so you would have to stop working at that time.
Okay, and we're going to talk about this in the next slide, but when I apply for my postgrad work permit. I don't have my work permit yet, but I've applied for it.
Of course. So once you have applied for your postgrad work permit, as long as you meet certain conditions, which we will talk about in the next slide, you're able to start working full time while you wait for that work permit.
Okay, and similarly, if I haven't applied for the postgrad work permit, I finished my program, but I'm going to take another program. Let's say I finish in April. I'm going to take another program in September. And I've already been accepted into that program. Can I work during the summer in between?
Yeah, as long as the number of days between your programs, between the end of the first program and the start of the second program is less than 150 days, then yes, you can start working in between programs.
Okay, and that's part-time, full-time?
Full-time, full-time.
Excellent. Okay, let's talk about the postgrad work permit. The postgrad work permit is what I call a golden ticket, okay? You usually have only one golden ticket in your life, and you should think about it that way. There was a policy last year which did allow some people who had postgrad work permits to extend it because of COVID. They haven't said anything about this year. They may put it into place this year, but by the time you guys qualify for your postgrad work permits, pandemic should be over, and the normal rules should apply, which means one postgrad work permit in your life. Okay, so why is this important? It's important because the postgrad work permit is an amazing work permit. It allows you to work anywhere for anyone in Canada. Okay, most work permits are not like that. Most work permits, the employer would have to apply for LMIA, which means that they have to advertise and show they can find Canadian to do the job. It can be very, very difficult to do that. So for you guys, if you are able to get a postgrad work permit, don't waste your golden ticket, okay? So the length of your postgrad work permit, if it's under 2 years, it coincides with the length of the program if it's between 8 months to 2 years. If it's over 2 years, you get a 3-year work permit, and that's what I call a deal, okay? It's very important to get this deal for many of you because it can be difficult to get what you need with regard to work experience for permanent residence within a 1 year, for example, work permit, especially given the current employment issues with COVID, especially as well when we're talking about permanent residence with governments. Last year was really easy to get for a lot of people. This year is going to be very difficult to get for a lot of people. So you never know what the laws would be once you think you qualify. Okay, so that 3-year is often what most people will need in order to have enough time to get the permanent residence for the work experience for permanent residence. Now, some people, you might not need it. Everyone is different. That's why it's important for you guys to understand what your plan is, okay? If you only did a 1-year program, for example, you can always do another 1-year program, okay? As long as you finish that 1-year program within 2 years of the first program, you can combine. So 1 + 1 is actually equals to 3, a 3-year postgrad work permit. So you can do that as well. Very important with regard to the postgrads is that you need to maintain full-time student status through every semester of the program when you're taking it, okay? So there's 2 exceptions to the rule. Authorized leave, that's when you get permission from the school. Before you actually take the leave, you go to the school and say, can I get authorized leave? And that's what Zia was talking about. It's exceptional circumstances, but you have to get permission from the school. You can't just say, oh, I want to take a leave and that's it, okay? Also, if it's your final semester, you only have 1 course left, that's okay. But if it's not your final semester and you don't have authorized leave, you are supposed to have been a full-time student throughout every single semester of your program. If you haven't been, then you very well could have your postgrad work permit rejected at the end. Okay. Sometimes people say to me, you know what, Elizabeth, this semester is especially difficult for me, maybe for personal reasons such as, you know, COVID or family sick or just run out of funds. In those kind of situations, take the authorized leave, ask the school for authorized leave instead of doing part-time. Okay. Sometimes, you know, students, you may be doing a full-time studies, but then you realize, oh shoot, I'm not able to, I'm going to be failing this course. Okay, that's okay. Continue to do the course, and you know, you can sit for your exams. Even if you fail the course, at least it's noted that you took the course, and then you'll still be a full-time student. Okay. Okay, so this is a very important thing for you to keep in mind. When should you apply for your postgrad? Okay, the rule is apply for your postgrad within 90 days of when you've completed your program. Okay, your first notice, remember Zia talked about the first notice that you received when you completed your program. Okay, within 90 days of that day, and when your study permit is still valid. So if your study permit expires before 90 days, then the deadline is your study permit. If it expires after the 90 days, then the deadline is the 90 days. Some people, if you are really keen, you might go onto the IRCC website and you might say, Elizabeth, how come IRCC says it's 180 days and you're telling me 90 days? It's because of the fact that after 90 days, remember Zia was talking about maintaining your status because you need to continue to be actively studying, otherwise you lose your status within 90 days. Well, this applies here, you see. After 90 days, you lose your status as a student. And if you lose your status as a student, if you apply for a postgrad work permit, just because the IRCC said 180 days, you apply just on its own, your work permit will be rejected because you have to have student status in order to apply. In those circumstances, you would have to file a restoration of status for your study permit and then apply for the work permit. But if you went into that situation, you cannot start working while waiting for your work permit. You can only do this, you can only start working while waiting for your work permit to be issued if you apply within the 90 days or when your study permit is still valid, because that's when you're still a student. Okay. This is very important because right now it's very difficult to go to the border to get your work permit. Before COVID, a lot of students might just go to the border and you can get your work permit right there and then, right? Because of COVID, the borders, a lot of them don't allow what we call flagpoling anymore. Just go around the flagpole and come back and get your work permit. You will usually have to apply for your work permit online. Inside Canada right now, it's taking around 4 or 5 months to get your work permit. And it's a lot better, I think, for most of you if you can actually work while, waiting for your work permit than if you can't. Okay, so rule is 90 days or when your study permit is still valid, whichever comes first. All right, let's talk about permanent residence. The first one I want to talk to you guys about, a lot of you guys may have already heard about it. It's the most popular one that has been publicized, a lot. It's called the express entry system. There's a lot of issues with it this year. I'm going to talk about it, but let me just give you a brief overview of how it works. So what happens is first you have to create an online profile. You can do so if you qualify under one of 3 categories: the Federal Skilled Worker class, Canadian Experience class, and the Federal Skilled Trades class. If you qualify, you can enter into the express entry pool, and you'll get a series of points based on your background and if you have provincial nomination. Now, it's very important that you guys understand that just because you created that online profile, you've been entered into the pool, it does not mean that you have applied for express entry. This is a very common misunderstanding by people, okay? You have not applied for permanent residence because, or through the express entry, because this is not counted as you being applied. This is just counted as you showing interest that you'd like to apply, okay? And that you qualify. But the government, then they have a draw every 2 weeks or so where they announce a number. But now, pre-COVID, it was mostly, 90% of the time they just announced a number, and whoever was above that number would get what's called an invitation to apply, right? It's only when you get the invitation to apply can you actually submit your application for permanent residence. If you don't have the invitation to apply, you stay in the pool, your profile gets expired in a year, and then it's all for nothing, okay? So this is the holy grail. It's to get your invitation to apply. What's been happening though recently is there's a lot of issues with getting the invitation to apply. So let me tell you a little story about how this has evolved, okay? Pre-COVID, for a few years, everything was, running along. The numbers would fluctuate a little bit, but like I said, 90% of the time, everybody in the pool, if your number was above a certain number, they announced the number, you're above that number, you get your invitation to apply. Then COVID hits. And the government says, well, we don't want to invite people who don't have work experience in Canada per se, because we're not opening our borders, okay? So at that point, they got very picky about the category. And this is now, we're moving towards the 2020, okay? And so in 2020, I think most of the draws were all around the Canadian experience class, which I'm going to talk about, which is all about you having Canadian experience in Canada. They did do a few draws at the beginning of 2020 and at the end of 2020 for the federal skilled worker, but most of it was Canadian experience class. And the numbers then for Canadian experience class started dropping a little bit, okay? Starting from 2021, there wasn't any draws for the federal skilled worker class. And I don't even think there was anything for federal skilled trades. I don't remember anything for 2021 for federal skilled. It was all concentrated on Canadian experience class, okay? So, and at one point, the government said, oh, we just want everybody under Canadian. So they dropped to the normal points are in the 400 something. They dropped it, I think it was like 20 something points. Like basically everybody at one point, if you were in the pool, it didn't matter what your score was, if you were the Canadian experience class, you got lucky and you got an invitation to apply, okay? And then the points remained really low, like historic lows in the 300s for much of the summer. And then in October, it all stopped. They didn't invite anyone other than someone who had provincial nomination since October. And so everyone was like, wait a minute, what's going on? Then there was a leak of a secret memo, internal memo that the government had, where they said that the government was too ambitious. And last year, they invited too many people and they filled up all of the inventory for this coming year, for 2022, by November. They already invited all of the people that they were they needed to immigrate in 2022 in November of last year. So they said, well, let's keep pausing draws for CEC, okay? And, now inventory has been building and building and building. Even if there is a draw and they start doing some draws, I mean, this is completely speculation on Elizabeth's part. Okay, on my part, I don't think that it's government policy or anything. But my thinking is, if they are going to need people for 2023, they because they can't have people landing in 2022, then probably they might start doing this in the latter part of this year, because normally it takes 6 months for express entry to be processed. This is my thinking. Maybe it's true, maybe not. Okay, but even if they do start the draws at that point, the numbers have been going so high that you may need to have really, really high numbers, much higher than before, in order to go through the express entry system. Okay, so let me just go into a little bit more detail about how this works. And don't worry, don't panic. I don't want to, give you any hypertension or anything like that. We do have some alternatives to this, and it is more of a temporary thing. It probably will relax a little bit more by next year. The government is looking for alternatives for international students, so they may come out with more programs as well. They haven't announced anything yet. What we're going to do is, everybody who signed up to our webinar, we're going to add you on the list where we're going to be sending you guys updates on immigration law. Okay, and so if new programs come up, that's when we'll send out some updates. So anyway, going back to express entry, there's 3 categories, like I said. The first category, the federal skilled worker class, they haven't invited people there for, almost 2 years now, but likely they will start again, hopefully soon, maybe by late this year or next year. Hopefully they'll do that again. A lot of you, if you already have 1 year of continuous high-skilled full-time, meaning at least 30 hours a week of work experience in one occupation, can qualify. Okay, so this work experience for this federal skilled worker class, you have to have at least 1 year full-time, at least 30 hours a week, high-skilled, and it has to be continuous, no breaks, in one occupation. But you can be self-employed for this. It does not have to be inside Canada. It could be outside of Canada, okay? And it could be while you're still studying, all right? And then we also, most important is you have to have a financial savings as well. A single person, normally you have to have around 13,000 Canadian dollars. So, if you have family members, you'll add a few thousand for each family member. The second one is the Canadian Experience Class. This is the one that had been prioritized during COVID. And this one, the work experience is very different from the federal skilled worker one. The work experience for this one is you need 1 year of high-skilled work experience in Canada. That is when you're employed. You can't be self-employed. You have to be employed. You have to get that T4, okay, from your employer, okay? And you can't, just employ yourself, like create a company, employ yourself, okay? It has to be employed, and it has to be when you are not a full-time student. But notice that I didn't say it has to be one occupation or that it has to be continuous. It does not have to be continuous. It does not have to be in one occupation. Okay, it has to be at least 30 times 52 weeks, right? So 30 hours a week times 52 weeks is 1,560 hours altogether. And, you have to pass the language exams, but just to get into the pool may not mean much. We're going to talk about the points you need in order to get out of the pool, okay? The skilled trades, these are not really applicable to you guys. You need to be in the construction trades. You need to have an LMIA or certification in the trades. Okay, so let's talk about how to get points for express entry. The first one is age. Once you hit your 30s, your points start going down, maybe 5 or 6 points in your 30s. In your 40s is a fast slide, -5, a 10, -11. Every year you get older, it's not a happy birthday. You know, you're like, by the time you hit your 45th birthday, the good news is that your points don't go down anymore. The bad news is you hit a big fat 0. So when you're in your 20s, you get maybe 110 points or 100 points if you have a partner. That is very, very significant. Okay, not a lot you can do about age except to apply when you can. Okay, education is super important. If you have 2 programs, you have a 3-year bachelor's or a 4-year bachelor's, and then you have a master's, or you have a certificate program or something on top, that makes your points jump. Language is very important. If your first language is English, you do your IELTS general or your CELPIP general. If you don't have work experience, even under the federal skilled work experience in Canada, I mean, even under the federal skilled worker class, your language points have to be very high. For example, IELTS, you'll need 7s in reading, writing, and speaking, 8 in listening, or 9s in CELPIP, okay, in order to have a chance. Relevant Canadian work experience. This is the same work experience as the one I talked about for the Canadian experience class, except we can count Canadian experience class as 1 year out of 3 years at the time of application. This one we can count in the last 10 years of application. Foreign work experience. If you have overseas high-skilled work experience, that in conjunction with your language and your work experience in Canada can give you points. Spouses, depending on their background, may or may not add some points if they're included. By the way, talking about spouses, okay? The definition of a spouse in immigration law is not just someone you are married to. It also includes common law partners. So who is a common law partner? It's someone who you have lived together for at least 1 year in a conjugal relationship, okay? So if you have that lived together with someone for 1 year, it doesn't matter what you think about with the relationship is serious or not. It is a common law relationship. When you fill out your forms for anything, study permit, work permit, visas, permanent residence, they will always ask you what is your marital status. And if you are common law, you have to declare common law. Otherwise, it's misrepresentation. It's very serious. Okay. Provincial nominee programs, they have to be express entry linked. Not all provincial nominee programs are express entry linked. I'm going to talk about this in the next slide. Previous study in Canada. So if you studied in OCAD, you have your master's or you have your university bachelor's degree, you do get 30 points for that, which is significant. Arranged employment. A lot of people think arranged employment is if you have a job offer. No, arranged employment, it's very specific. You have to have an employer-specific work permit. So post-grad work permits would not get you arranged employment. If you have siblings, you have maybe 15 points if they're Canadians or permanent residents in Canada. Fluency in French is very important. If you're fluent in French, and at that level, I'm talking about, you guys do the IELTS for English, right? The level of the 6 in IELTS is the level that you'll need to have in French in order to get significant points for express entry. And trade certification, that's for the skilled trades, okay? So let's move on to the express entry streams for provincial nominations. Provincial nominee programs are programs that the provinces have for themselves. Immigration is federal jurisdiction. The federal government is responsible for immigration, but the federal government has made an agreement with each province and territory to allow each of them to create their own programs. and they're called provincial nominee programs. Okay, Ontario's provincial nominee program is called the OIMP, Ontario Immigrant Nominee Program. And Ontario has express entry linked, where if you get a pass through these express entry, you get what's called nominated through express entry stream, then you get 600 points added to your express entry profile. And plus, what's very important is right now the government is only inviting provincial nominee programs, provincial nominees to apply. So you can go through that, okay? So how do you get through this? Well, it's not like you can just apply directly to the government, okay? I kind of explain it to people. It's kind of like, for example, you know the dating app Bumble? First of all, I haven't been on it because I'm too old. It's before my time, but sorry, it's after my time. But as I understand it, with Bumble, the guys can contact the women directly. The women have to contact sees who's in the pool, and then they contact the guy. Okay, same thing with this, right? You are like the guys. Okay, you can just go and contact the province directly to apply. The province sees who is in the pool. They see if they like your circumstances. And if they do, they will contact you and say, you have a notification of interest. If you like it, you can apply for your provincial nomination. So who do they like? There's a few categories. The first one is the human capital stream. Now this one is kind of, we don't know exactly who they're going to invite. They have said that people who have tech backgrounds, they do like them. And so they often look at if someone has a tech background, and they also have the certain level of numbers for the score for express entry, they might invite them to apply. Other times they have also identified other occupations. They don't necessarily say what those occupations are beforehand, but sometimes they have also invited other occupations where the score is at above a certain level to also apply. Okay, you have to have a bachelor's degree or higher in order for them to for you to qualify for this. Again, French speakers, lucky French speakers. Okay, so if you have that level that I talked about last time, and you have your bachelor's degree, you may also receive a notification of interest, but your score, your express entry base score, usually has to be at a certain level as well. Skilled trades. This is if you were working in Ontario for at least 1 year in one of the trades, the construction trades for the most part, okay? All right, well, now I'm a little bit tired of talking about express entry. Let's talk about something else. Zia, you want to talk about something other than express entry?
Definitely, definitely. So Ontario does have other streams that are outside of express entry, and that'll still qualify you for provincial, that it still qualifies as a provincial nomination program. Specifically in Ontario, the way that they have, last year they changed their systems. And so previously, if you qualified for any of the non-express entry streams, you would basically go online, create a profile or create an application, submit it, and eventually it would get processed. As of April last year, they, like I said, Ontario changed the way that they approached their non-express entry streams. So the first step for anyone who qualifies in one of Ontario's non-express entry streams is to create a profile. So you create a profile specific to the program that you qualify in, and go into that program's pool of applicants. Okay. So with express entry, when Elizabeth was talking about the 3 different streams that you could qualify in, express entry was one pool, right? Regardless, you would always go into the same pool of candidates. With Ontario, they have changed the way that they do this. So it's a separate pool based on each specific stream that they have. Okay. And we'll talk about the different streams in a moment. But basically the first step, the first step is to create a profile, go into the application pool for that particular program. What happens when you're in that pool is you're given a score, and each category uses different criteria to basically calculate that score. Now, when we're looking at these non-express entry streams, there are some categories of points that are the same. So for example, Canadian work experience, language abilities in a couple of the different streams. If you've studied in Canada, your field of study, your location of study, these are different areas that Ontario looks at for points. But the specific ones that are applied depend on the category that you're qualifying through. So you create a profile, you go into the pool of applicants for your particular stream. In that pool, you're given a score based on your stream. And then Ontario goes into that pool and they do draws. Okay, so again, they're looking at the highest scoring individuals and they're selecting a certain number. If you're selected, you get what's called an invitation to apply. From the date that you receive your invitation, you have 14 days to complete and submit your full application to the province. Okay, now the draws that Ontario does, there's no schedule in advance. Okay, so in each of these different streams, Ontario will do draws just periodically. There's no advance notice, there's no indication to say, okay, tomorrow we're going to be doing a draw for the master stream, for example. Basically, if you qualify, you want to be in the pool as soon as possible so that you're part of as many draws as Ontario does do. Let's take a look at the different streams.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to sort of like have a little chat with you about this. You know, a lot of people say, well, this sounds just like the express entry stream. Why is this one, you know, what is up with this thing, right?
Yeah, so there's definitely a couple of very important differences between express entry and these non-express entry streams. First, like I said, if you qualify under multiple streams, you have to create multiple profiles. Okay, so just because you created one profile doesn't mean that you're in every different pool like you are with express entry, right? In express entry, you create one profile, regardless of whether you qualify under the skilled worker, skilled trades, Canadian experience class, it's one pool of applicants. With Ontario, we have, there's a master stream, the PhD stream, employer job offer streams, all of these have individual pools, okay? And so if you qualify for multiple, you want to create multiple profiles so that you're in each individual pool of applicants.
And you guys have, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, you guys have to understand that the criteria to get into the pools is very, very different from the criteria for express entry. And so the competition where you're going to be competing with people is very different. Also note that age, for example, is not a factor that they look at, okay? Even some of these things are very different from express entry. So Canadian work experience, they're not looking at the same kind of Canadian work experience that you had. Can you use Canadian work experience when you're studying for this?
So we're waiting for clarification from Ontario on that.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes. Thank you. Okay. But there are different sort of situations. Masters, they don't look at if you have a job offer. You don't have to have any work experience for any of these programs. Okay. So the criteria is very important. But one thing to keep in mind, guys, is we're still looking at a lot of people who can qualify for either express entry or programs such as this, right? And, when express entry is going well, the number of people who apply for this goes down, okay? But when express entry is not going well, the number of people who apply for things like this goes up. And so, there may be a lot of people who haven't put their mind to applying for something that's not express entry. But I know international students like to do their research and they talk. And so eventually, I think if it hasn't happened yet, this stream is going to go up higher and higher and higher. If I were you guys, if you're, for example, graduating in April, don't dilly-dally and say, oh, you know, I'll get to it to do my language exam, I'll get to it, and wait until later. Get to it when you qualify right away. The earlier the better, because otherwise if you get in later and you miss the boat and then they've already, because the Ontario system, they have a certain quota about how many people they can invite every year. Once that quota is up, they close their applications. So, you know, it would be best. That's what I normally advise. When you qualify, make sure that you put yourself into the pool. Okay. Sorry, Zia, I cut you off before. You were going to say.
No problem. I think the other, you did cover quite a bit of it, but the other point to keep in mind is that this is a non-express entry stream, right? These are non-express entry streams. So when you get your nomination, it's not going to give you an additional 600 points if you also have an express entry profile, for example. This is very separate from the whole express entry system. With a nomination, you're going through now it's also online, but you're basically filling out forms still. You're submitting an application for permanent residence through more of a traditional PR route. And what that means is your processing times for these programs are much longer than what you would see with express entry. So on average right now, you're looking at about 18 months for your permanent residence application through the non-express entry stream. So very different than when you're looking at express entry.
Yes, the processing times are probably longer, although express entry right now, a lot of them are taking over a year to process even express entry. But you have to keep in mind, bird in hand is better than two birds in the bush. Okay, we don't know if you have to wait a year to get your work experience before you can qualify for express entry, for example, for a lot of you, right? Whereas here, you don't have to, and I promise we're going to get to those slides, but you don't have to have work experience. Like I said, you can apply right when you graduate. And then, so by the time, and when you've then applied and you just, are waiting for your application, yes, there's a little bit of anxiety, but at least you've submitted your application. It's not like people who haven't even been able to submit their application yet. Okay.
Yeah, and then to add on to what you said before about the points, it is a very different, when we talk about certain things like, for example, Canadian work experience, the way that it's calculated in express entry versus the way that it's calculated in Ontario is very different, right? We look at, for example, when you look at length of work experience, there's only two categories in Ontario, whether you have 12 months or less than 12 months. Whereas when you look at the express entry system, it's a sliding scale based on the years of experience you have. All that to say, like, it is important to take a look at these streams as well. Take a look at all the different options that you have available to you, and you might be surprised as to which one actually does work better for you. And when the provinces are creating these streams, they really are looking to see, okay, how do we create this program so we're not duplicating what express entry is doing? And so we see the criteria, we see the way that they process and create their expression of interest systems are very different than what the province is looking for, so that they end up with very different candidates as well. Let's take a look at the streams. So as you saw on the previous slide, we did say that there was quite a few streams that fall in the non-express entry routes. The first two are the master's and PhD streams. So this is two different streams. One is the master's graduates and the second is the PhD graduate streams. They're both for individuals who have actually completed either their master's or their PhD programs here in Ontario. Okay, so you do have to first finish that program of study. It's not, you can't be applying before you finish, so when you're near your completion or anything like that, it does have to actually be completed first. And there is a timeline, so you have to apply within 2 years of finishing your program. Okay, now, When we talk about the deadline here, this 2-year window is a little different than anything else. Ontario has to be a little different. That 2-year window is from the date that's actually listed on your diploma itself. So for example, if your master's degree, the graduation date on there is October 2021, that's what's actually listed on your diploma, then you would have until October 2023 to qualify and apply through the master's stream. Now, with both the master's and the PhD streams, like Elizabeth said before, you don't need a job offer and you don't need any work experience. So as soon as you finish these programs of study, you're able to look at qualifying and applying through the master's or PhD streams. Now, with these programs, though, Ontario is really looking for individuals who are ready to start working. Okay, so let's say, for example, you finished your master's program and now you're looking to start your PhD program. That would disqualify you from the master's stream. Ontario is looking for someone who's not looking to pursue further education at this time. That doesn't mean that you can't look at it later down the road. But currently, when you're applying through the master's stream, Ontario is looking for individuals that are going to be living and working in Ontario rather than pursuing further or higher education. Again, that doesn't preclude you from doing it later on. You may do the master's, get your permanent residence, and then a year, 2 years down the line, decide to do your PhD. That's completely fine. But at the immediate time that you're looking to apply for the program, you can't be doing any further education.
You know, a lot of people ask us, okay, if I apply for provincial nominee program, does that mean I have to be in Ontario forever? The answer is no, not necessarily, right? So once you guys have your permanent residence, you can change your intentions, right? You do have the right, the constitutional right, to move anywhere in Canada and do whatever you like. However, the provinces very jealously guard the people that they nominate because they have a certain quota and they don't want to waste that quota on people who are not going to go into and stay in the province or intend to stay in the province. So if you do go and find a job outside of Ontario, they then normally, even like if you've received your nomination and you're waiting for permanent residence with the federal government, it could very well be an issue and your application may very well be rejected. So normally when you're applying for provincial nominations, you have to plan to be in the province until at least your permanent residence is issued.
Yeah, definitely. So going back to the different streams that are not express entry based, Ontario also has 3 employer-based streams. Okay, so these are for individuals who have a permanent full-time job offer with a company here in Ontario. Now, like I said, there are 3 streams that qualify, but there's 3, I guess, substreams for these employer-based categories, but there are common criteria for the employers. Okay, so let's look at that first, and then we'll talk about the criteria for each of the individual streams. So when we're looking at these employer-based streams, the company that's offering you this permanent full-time position, they have requirements that they have to meet in order to be able to support your application through Ontario. They have to be in business for at least 3 years, right? From the date of your application, they have to be in business for they have had to have been in business for at least 3 years before. If they are within the Greater Toronto Area, then they have to have grossed an income of at least $1 million in their past fiscal year. And they need to currently have at least 5 full-time Canadian or permanent employees at the time of your application. Now, those numbers do decrease if the employer is located outside of the Greater Toronto Area. So the gross income goes down to $500,000 in the past fiscal year, and the number of employees goes down to 3 full-time Canadian or permanent resident employees, again, at the time of your application. Okay, so these are the company requirements, right? The company that's supporting your application. When we're talking about the employer-based programs, there's company requirements, there's requirements on the position that you're being offered, and there's criteria for you as the applicant. So let's take a look at these in the different streams. So the first stream is for international students. Now, this is for someone who has finished a program, an eligible program of study here in Ontario. And you do, again, have to apply within 2 years of completing your program. Now, there are only specific programs that will qualify you to go through the international student stream. So either you have done a program that's at least 2 years in length, or you've completed a 1-year program that requires a degree as an admission requirement for the program. This is really important. Okay, so when we're looking at someone who has finished a program that's only 1 year in length, we have to go back and take a look at the admission requirements for that particular program. And it has to specifically state only a degree. So if the admission requirement says, okay, you can study in this program if you've done a degree or a diploma, or it states that you're eligible if you've done a degree or you've completed some work experience, that program would then no longer qualify you to be eligible under the international student stream. Okay, so to go over that again, either you've done a 2-year program or a 1-year program that has only a degree as the admission requirement. Okay, again, you have to do it within 2 years of finishing that program. Now, with the international student stream, the job does have to be a high-skilled position, but the wage that's being offered to you can be at the entry level. So this is going to be a bit lower than other programs that we're going to look at. What you don't see here, and what's very important, is that there is no work experience requirement. Okay, so as soon as you finish your program of study here, regardless of whether you have any work experience, you can look at qualifying and applying through the international student stream. Okay, the second employer-based program that we want to take a look at is the skilled worker stream. Okay, this is a program for individuals who have at least 2 years of work experience within the past 5 years in the same occupation as the job that's being offered to you. Okay, so here we do see that there is a work experience requirement for this particular stream. You have to have at least 2 years within the past 5 years, and those 2 years have to be in the same occupation as the position that you're using to support your permanent residence application. There is no education component here. There's no language component here. So the skilled worker stream, even when we look at the points for this, for the expression of interest system, your language proficiency, your highest level of education, none of that affects eligibility or the points for the skilled worker stream. The job offer so the position that you are being offered does still have to be high skilled, and the wage does have to meet the median wage. So this again is a little higher than what we talked about with the international student stream. The last employer-based program is the in-demand occupations. Now, this is for when we talk about the in-demand, there's a specific list of occupations that Ontario will accept for this particular stream. Now, here, because it's on the occupation list, what we see on those occupation lists is what are traditionally considered low-skilled positions. Okay, this is the only program that we see within Ontario that includes low-skilled positions. Okay, so it does have to be on the list, and you have to be able to show that you have at least 9 months of experience in Ontario in that same occupation. Okay, so that does have to be work experience in Ontario specifically. There is a language component for the in-demand skills stream, but it is lower than what we see in some of the federal programs. Here, the language component is CLB4.
So, a lot of you guys, you probably wouldn't apply under skilled worker or in demand. The international students probably would be the best for you guys because as long as you meet the criteria, you apply within 2 years of your graduation, right? And you have a job that's high skilled, the wages are a lot lower. You don't have to have any work experience. Most of you already have your degrees and such, so it's great. And you have a full-time and permanent job. Okay, all of these have to be full-time and permanent job. The reason why we're talking about the other two is in case you guys have a spouse who has an open work permit, okay, then they can also probably apply as principal applicants in other things like this, right? So we have, for example, I have a client who is doing a PhD, and which takes like 5 years, but her husband qualifies under in demand. So the husband is applying as the principal applicant for the entire family. Okay, so don't forget about your partner. Your partner can play a very, very important role in this. By the way, with regard to spousal work permits, when you're a student, your spouse gets an open work permit for the same length of time as your study permit. When you graduate, in order for your spouse to extend their work permit, you have to have a high-skilled job, okay? Otherwise, your spouse won't be able to get their postgrad work permit. All right. A lot of these categories are something that is, it may not work for yourselves if you're artists, and a lot of artists are self-employed, and you can see that all of the ones that I was talking about before, didn't allow a lot of options for self-employed people. Okay, so there is a specific category for self-employed artists that I do want to talk to you guys about, because a lot of you guys may qualify under this category. So in order to qualify, you have to have 2 years of work experience in the past 5 years in something that is a cultural activity, either self-employed, or if you're not self-employed, it has to be at the world-class level, okay? Most of the time, I think we'll be looking at the self-employed, although some of you may just be amazing as well at the world-class level. So 2 years of work experience. If you don't have 2 years of work experience where you were able to support yourself as being a self-employed person, you can think about doing it from this point on, right? It's all about planning for immigration. The second part of it is you have to show that you will be making a significant contribution to cultural life in Canada. So it's not just what you've done before, but you will be able to do this. So you may have 2 years of work experience back in your home country. Now in Canada, you have to show that you have the potential to make it in Canada as well, okay? So this is the crux of this permanent residence application. The only thing about it is that it is taking a very long time right now to process, upwards of almost 3 years to process in Canada. It used to be just a few months, couple of years ago, and now it's stretched to a lot longer. That being said, almost everything in immigration these days are taking much longer than they're supposed to. So that processing time could shorten. But if you are self-employed, you are making significant contribution to cultural life in Canada. Even after your postgrad work permit expires, we may be able to extend your work permit under the significant benefit work permit category as well. Okay. Like I said, it's not only you're going to make a significant contribution, you're going to be able to support yourself, right? Through your art, you're going to be able to support yourself. Okay, so we've talked a lot about different options. I'm sure there's a lot of details that are swimming around in your head. What should you do next practically?
The first and most important, have a plan, right? So this is a great first step in terms of getting a sense of what the different programs are. But this is just the tip of the iceberg. This is very high level in terms of the different programs that are out there. And it certainly does not cover every program that is available in terms of becoming a permanent resident, for example. And so it is really important to speak with a professional, know what your immigration goals are, and have that immigration plan set out in advance. And not just having a plan A, but thinking about a plan B, a plan C, because immigration does change quite often. But really do take the time, set out an immigration plan, speak with someone who can really guide you. And like Elizabeth talked about earlier, you may actually be able to reach your immigration goal earlier than you expect, because if you have a spouse, for example, one of you may be studying, the other may be able to apply for permanent residence, or you may just not realize that you already do qualify for permanent residence based on things that you've done in the past. So really make sure that you are speaking with someone who can guide you, create that immigration plan for you, so you know exactly what you need to do to reach it.
So once you have your plan, then it's all about execution, right? So there will likely be certain things you need to do beforehand to be able to apply. And I know it's difficult, but it's, it just depends on your priorities. If staying in Canada is a priority for you, then, you got to make it a priority, and you can do it. You guys have gone through so much already to get to this point. But immigration is not an easy path, but it's certainly, you guys are on the right path. Let me just tell you guys that, right? So for example, you study for your IELTS, study for your CELPIP or your TEF or your TCF, your language exams. Even if English is your first language, I have many people whose English is their first language and their only language, and they don't do well on these language exams because they're confused or they don't know what's happening. Do some practice exams so that you're prepared. When you go to the exam, you know exactly what to expect, okay? Sometimes the programs that you're doing may or may not get you that postgrad work permit that you need, right? So think about, what it is, and before you just apply for something just because you qualify, know what your plan is. And if you need to do another study program or you need to do something else, you might need to bite the bullet and just do it, okay?
We talked about this one really early in the presentation. It's really important that you stay in status while you're here in Canada. Know what the conditions of your permits are, and make sure that you are complying with them, because it is important that the time that you spend here in Canada, you do keep your status, because that does affect, of course, the ability to apply for permanent residence later, and get your citizenship if that's your end goal. And the second part is, it's really easy to not understand a particular type of application, not understand a particular definition. Elizabeth talked about the definition of spouse, for example, right? It's a lot of people don't realize that living together with someone in a marital-like relationship, after a year, you're considered a common law spouse, and that has to be included in your application. Really important to ensure that your applications, you're not misrepresenting yourself. And it can be innocent, or it can be, it can be an innocent mistake that you've made as well. But really important that you have complete applications, that you've kept your status, and that you're not misrepresenting. With misrepresentations, IRCC does actually, it does carry a 5-year ban from being able to apply for further applications. And even after those 5 years are up, it can certainly be a lot more difficult to then try and apply for either temporary permanent residence, and your applications would be would be subject to even greater scrutiny at that point.
If your application is rejected, contact a lawyer right away, okay? Don't just call the call center and think that they're going to be able to help you, okay? The call center, if you call them, they might listen to you if you can actually get through to a live person. But probably what they'll say is, oh, okay, well, A, I can't help you, or B, write a letter, okay? And so let's say you write a letter, you follow their advice, and it's still rejected, right? Then you come to me and you say, Elizabeth, now can you help me? And, my hands might be tied at that point, because A, by the time you get a letter back, if you ever get a response back, it probably would be outside of the federal court notice days. If you have a decision inside Canada, it's 15 days from the time of the time inside Canada. If it's outside of Canada, it's 60 days from the decision. Okay. And B, I can try, if I try to submit what's called reconsideration, so that's not going to federal court, just asking a supervisor to take another look at your application. If you've already submitted a letter and it was rejected, they're not going to take another look at something I submit, because you only get one reconsideration for your application. Okay, there are other things. For example, if you're in Canada, you may be out of status, you may be outside of the restoration of status time, which can be a major issue as well. So in the end, don't wait. Contact a lawyer, not a consultant who does not have legal training, and they can't go to court. Okay, don't call the call center, call a lawyer. Okay. All right, so this is our contact information. If you do want to have a consultation to go for your own specific plan and what you should do, it's never too early. It's often too late, but never too early to have a plan. Okay, so do contact us. We do offer a discounted rate for OCAD students who have come to our webinars. Just let us know that you come to our webinars and you're from OCAD. Okay. All right. Let's talk about some questions over here. Okay,
Perfect.
Zia, are you ready?
Let's do it. So the first one, Elizabeth, is that there was a program last year for people who graduated. They didn't need 1 year of full-time Canadian work experience and were able to apply for permanent residence right away. Do you think that this is going to happen again this year?
My opinion, that was called the TR to PR program. My thinking is likely that particular one is not, because that's what got the government into so much trouble filling out their inventory last year, in November. The government is talking about trying to figure out something for international students though, but likely it's going to be much more restrictive than last year. Last year, you didn't even need to have any work experience. You just needed to be working and have graduated and you could apply. This year, what they may do, if they're going to do another program, because they're only limited with their numbers, maybe it might, this is pure speculation, of course, right? I have no knowledge other than, as the part of the Canadian Bar Association, we did put out some recommendations to the minister because he asked us for them. But it probably work experience is something that differentiates between students who are able to, stay in Canada and those who don't. So that might be something that's there. All right. What happens to your work experience while you are studying when you want to apply for permanent residence? Does that count as an experience? Or do they count the duration you work after graduation?
So this really does depend on the program that you're applying through. If you're looking at Canadian Experience class, for example, then work experience that you obtained while you're a student doesn't count. So we would only be looking at work experience that you've accumulated after you have received confirmation that you have completed your program of study. So really, if we go back to when you can apply for that postgrad work permit, it would be around that same time that you can start counting your work experience for the Canadian Experience class program. Now, of course, like I said, this is different depending on which program you're applying through. For federal skilled worker, for example, you can use work experience that you've obtained while you're a student. The difference is, though, with the federal skilled worker program, when we're talking about the minimum eligibility criteria, it does have to be a year of continuous work experience. So it is definitely very different, but in some programs, yes, you can use work experience that you've obtained while you're a student. In others, you can't.
Okay.
Okay, next question here. My master's program has 5 semesters in total, September 2021 to April 2023. How long of a postgrad work permit am I eligible for?
Good question. Normally, an academic year is 2 semesters. So if you have 5 semesters, you probably could be counted as having at least 2 academic years, in which case you would get a 3-year work permit. A lot of it depends on what the school counts as an academic year. Okay. I am in my last semester and I am working part-time off campus 20 hours a week. Is that okay? Am I in trouble?
So in your last semester, if you are a part-time student, you are still able to work off campus part-time, so up to 20 hours a week, as long as
too, right? If you're part-time in your last semester, part-time student in your last semester, you can work full-time off campus, right?
No, you can work part-time off. If you're either a part-time or full-time student in your last semester, you can work up to 20 hours a week off campus.
I think if you're full-time, okay, we're gonna have to double check on that. I think if you're a full-time student in your last semester, you can work part-time off campus. For sure, you can work part-time off campus 20 hours a week. You're not in trouble for sure. I thought, Zia, that I'll have to double check. But if you're part-time in your last semester, you can work full-time off campus. But maybe I'll have to double check on that. But for sure, you're not in trouble.
You're not in trouble.
Yeah, as long as you're not, you are still studying, you're still a student, you haven't graduated yet. Okay.
The next question here, does finishing my program mean receiving my marks for my program, or does it mean the day I finish my last day of the program?
Does finishing my program mean receiving my marks or this day of the program? So
I think this is asking whether it's the classes or whether it's marks.
You're still a full-time student until you receive notification that you've completed your program. So if you finish your last day, but you haven't gotten your grades yet, then I think you're still considered a full-time student. Can I leave Canada while waiting for the work permit to get approved?
Technically, yes. Technically, if you have a valid study permit, you can travel, you can re-enter if you still have your visa, if you need a visa. So if you meet all the general requirements, then technically, yes, you would be able to. Now, with that being said, of course, COVID has made that a bit more complicated because there are additional travel, or there were at least additional travel restrictions. So you do want to keep that in mind. Generally, our advice, especially during COVID, is to stay in Canada while you're waiting for the processing of that application, and then traveling afterwards. But technically, yes, you are able to. Elizabeth, does design count as high-skilled?
Does design count as high-skilled? I think I'm not exactly sure what kind of design, but most, I think, design sort of, probably would be counted as high-skilled, but design can stretch for different things. So normally what we need to do is we need to see all of the duties about what you are doing in order to determine whether or not it fits. It's not just the title, it's what you actually do. Okay, this person asked, do cousins or distant cousins count as siblings?
No, they do not. So when we're talking about siblings, we're really looking at your actual blood siblings. So your brother, your sister, not cousins.
Yeah, it's not subjective. This is not like who you consider your bro or whatever. It's your actual siblings. Will the recording be available to view? Yes, we're going to be sending out recordings for everybody afterwards. As soon as I get this edited, we'll send you the link to view it. And the slides as well.
Perfect. Elizabeth, as a student graduating from an Ontario school, which other provincial program can I apply to? Or would it be better for me to apply to Ontario?
You know what, you have to come to our office and we have to take a look at your circumstances. Every single provincial province and territory has their own programs. I will say this, people just think sometimes other provinces are easier or such. it's easy if you can find a job there or you have some ties. Most provinces, not all, like there are a couple of like very distinct ones where you don't have to have a tie there yet, but almost all of the programs otherwise require that you have ties to that. You have a job offer, you have work experience, you studied in that province. So it really depends. You can't just say, oh, I want to go to Saskatchewan because it's easy to go there. If you go there, you don't have a job, then there's no point. Okay. So yeah, so again, a lot of these questions are very subjective. You do need to go and get specific counseling on your own situation. And normally, sometimes, it always surprises me when people say, before they've even met me, they say, how much is it for me to get permanent residence? And I said, well, that's kind of like asking me, when you go to a restaurant, you go and ask people, how much is it for dinner, right? You don't know what it is until you've actually considered all of the circumstances to determine what's the right plan. Okay, I'm sorry, I might have missed. Can you migrate as a self-employed artist? We did go through that.
We went through it. Yeah, we did go through it. There will be a recording, like Elizabeth said, that'll be sent out. But yes, there is a program for self-employed artists.
Could I start my application for postgrad before I graduate? Receiving a note saying that I ended my program. I wanted to keep the part-time job I have them at the moment, even after graduation.
So with the postgrad application, you basically can apply for it as soon as you've received written confirmation that you've completed your program of study. When we say that, we're talking really about any written confirmation that tells you that you've completed your program of study. So it could be your final grades, it could be a letter from the schools, anything really that indicates that you have finished your program, and it's at that point that you have to stop working on your study permit. Once you apply for your postgrad work permit, then you're able to start working again full-time while you're waiting for a decision on that postgrad work permit application. In terms of your graduation ceremony, usually that's a lot later, and so we're not really looking at the graduation ceremony date. We're really focusing on when you get any written confirmation that you've completed your program.
Yeah, now that being said, what an officer looks at when they look at whether or not to give you a postgrad work permit is they do want to see your transcripts to make sure that you have worked as a full-time student. And also a letter of completion from the school is also good as well. So normally those two items, you should have it in your application to have a good package to send out.
My sister got her permanent residence. Can she sponsor me?
So with family sponsorships, and that's a whole different webinar, but family sponsorships, normally what has to happen is you can sponsor only your parents or your spouse or your children. Sometimes if you're under the age of 22 and your sister qualifies to sponsor your parents, you can be attached to their application as a dependent child. But if you're over the age of 22, then you're no longer a dependent child, so you'll have to apply on your own. If I finish school with a bachelor's, will I still need a postgrad work permit?
It will depend on your circumstances in terms of where you're at in your immigration process, but certainly if you're here, you have a study permit and you want to be able to work after you're done your program of study, then a postgrad work permit may be an option for you. Again, I would recommend that you contact us to schedule a consultation appointment so that we can go through your background specifically and really outline the options that are available to you. I've got my student visa, but I'm not in Canada yet and will be coming in August for my second year. When should I start applying for permanent residence?
Well, that really depends on your circumstances. Again, it's like that asking how much is dinner, or well, can I get dinner? Like, it really depends on your circumstance. You really need to go and have a consultation to go over your circumstances. But one thing I did want to add, I didn't cover, Zia mentioned it in before. for those people who are choosing to do your programs outside of Canada, to get your, when you get like 30 points for your points for express entry for having studied in Canada, that is predicated on people having 8 months of physical presence in Canada. So if you did all your program outside, right now you can still get the postgrad work permit, but you don't have your 8 months of physical presence in Canada, then you could very well not be able to get those points for studying in Canada. Okay, so even though it might be a little bit easier for you to study at home, you need to consider things like that. Now, for someone who is doing a bachelor's, that might be okay because you'll have 8 months of study, but someone who's doing a 1-year program, that's something that you have to consider. Will leaving the country on a study permit affect my status?
So being outside of Canada doesn't necessarily, again, it will depend on your situation. It's a very hard question to answer just based on that. So I would recommend that you send us an email and we can schedule a consultation appointment. I think we have time for one last question. Elizabeth, could you please repeat that part about the spouse having an open work permit and I need to have a HighSkilled offer?
Okay, so when you guys graduate, right? So your spouse, their work permit, their spousal work permit should be valid until the end of your study permit. Okay, so that's great. Now, what happens when their work permit is going to expire and you're no longer a student? How do they extend their work permit? To qualify for an open spousal work permit, if your spouse has a work permit, so if you get your postgrad work permit, you can work. But your spouse does not qualify for open spousal work permit if you are not working. You have to have a high-skilled job, not just any job, high-skilled job, in order for your spouse to qualify for an open spousal work permit when their current work permit expires. Okay. All right, guys. It was great being here with you guys. Thank you for your great questions. Susan and Liddell, thank you guys so much for inviting us to come again and talk with everyone.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth and Zia. That was extremely useful and a lot of things for students to think about. So thank you very much for your time, and thanks to everyone who attended today. And as Elizabeth mentioned, you will get the recording of the session in probably a week or so, depending.
Excellent. Okay, take care, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay,
Bye.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Zia.